I just thought, nah, I don't want to get back into that. Even if it was a blinding studio and it was, a great place that did great stuff, I still think just the overall drudgery is this is for me personally speaking, it would get to me eventually, just 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, every week, every month, every year. Yeah, I think what appeals to me about freelance is, the chance or the opportunity to just do something different, or to have that time in between just to do your own stuff.
Please welcome today's guest, Allan Williams. Allan is a freelance 3D concept artist who creates stunning 3D creations that are a delicious blend of retro-futurism and nostalgia. Whether it's gaming influences, music or scooters, whatever Allan touches gets the same level of craft that results in his epic creations. In this episode, we get a closer look at Allan's journey, which began as him starting off as a traditional graphic designer, creating movie posters for clients such as Nicholas Winding Refn, and to how he has transitioned to where he is now as a 3D artist. Also, look forward to his take on what it's like embarking on a career as a freelancer and how that has been going so far, which, if you're going for the same thing, will be useful to hear. So let's get to it, and if you're enjoying this podcast so far, please like and subscribe. Okay, yeah, let's get going. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm excited to announce our next guest, Allan Williams. Hey Allan.
Hi, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. Obviously, me and you know this, but not many people do, but you probably should have been one of the first guests on the podcast. I invited you on a good few years ago, and I got myself burned on the joys of podcasting by messing up some technical stuff and destroyed the recording. So thank you for jumping back on and not blocking me on social media and everything.
No worries.
I think it's better as well this time around because obviously some good things are happening then as well. A lot has happened since we last spoke, and a lot of the stuff we did cover has kind of been emptied from my mental reservoir, so we can definitely cover that stuff again.
Sure.
But yeah, firstly, I'm glad to have you on because I just love your work. I think you have a great eye. I love the way you create your designs. But also, there's other things that we'd love to talk about today as well. Your career and your journey towards art. But before we actually begin, I'd love it if you could give everyone a little origin story as to who you are.
Right. So I'm a London-based motion graphics / 3D artist. I'm probably more of a 3D artist, to be honest with you, than motion graphics because probably still don't know enough about animation. I think modeling and rendering and, kind of concepting is probably my neck of the woods, so to speak. And before, I'm currently freelancing doing 3D stuff. And before that, my first jobs in the design industry were as a poster designer for films. And that's how I got my break in the industry, basically. And so I'm kind of like a traditional graphic designer. That's my training. As I first started those jobs, I was just learning Cinema 4D and things like that in my spare time. And then, that hobby became more of a thing. And it was like, okay, I want to do this full time now. And I want to leave behind 2D graphic design, which is, I still love 2D graphic design, but I think, 3D was like somewhere that I always wanted to be honest with you. Even like back when I was a teenager, I tried to get into product design. Because of things like Star Wars, massive cliche of that. But I used to have that. I still got it actually. The Art of Empire Strikes Back.
Yep.
And it's amazing. And I was really struck by not necessarily Ralph McQuarrie, who gets all of the plaudits, but Joe Johnston, who obviously designed Boba Fett's helmet, a lot of the stormtroopers, a lot of those amazing things that's still so timeless. It was mainly Joe Johnston, and he has a industrial design background. So I thought, okay, if I want to get into concept art, I should become an industrial designer. But it didn't happen. But anyway, all these years later, here I am as a professional, doing 3D, more or less concept stuff, either professional or personal work. I've kind of come full circle, which is nice. But it'd be even better to work on a Star Wars film.
For sure. You mentioned obviously that you started off in traditional design, like in graphic design, and now you've evolved into what you do now, which is what gets more the 3D side, but still like designing or in the concept realm. Excuse me. And I guess that's quite a common theme that you tend to hear a lot or see with many careers is there's always like an evolution with a discipline. I'm sure there's like many people who have stuck to one thing, but maybe it's the evolution with maybe perhaps a tool set or like, like obviously like you mentioned traditional, you're probably using rulers, pens, markers and all sorts. And now it's going to like a stylus and GPUs and all that kind of stuff. But when you became a graphic designer initially, was that also like on a path of evolution from something early on? Or was that something that you wanted to be? Obviously, you kind of answered that a little bit because you mentioned you wanted, the Star Wars book. That definitely changed or triggered like what you wanted to be as a professional. But what led you to becoming a graphic designer?
Well, I studied a kind of general art and design course when I was between the ages of 16 and 18, and then tried to get into higher education that way for like first time round. But then it didn't work out, and then many years later, I came back to education as a mature student. But when I did, it was more about, for some reason, over the years, I'd forgotten about wanting to be like a product designer or a concept artist. And because I'd spent the last 10 years in a band playing music and stuff like that, I started gravitating towards like posters, like screen prints and illustration and that kind of thing. And that led me back to thinking about going back to university. So I started studying graphic design and illustration. But then when I started that, I discovered Cinema 4D, which then sort of woke up all of those old feelings about, concept art and 3D. And then, I didn't look back since then, to be honest with you, even though, obviously I ended up becoming a 2D graphic designer. But I think that was always my true passion, to be honest with you, like 3D. And that's why I am now.
At least from my perspective, it's cool to see that a lot of like you mentioned, the poster work and the artwork and that side of things stem from a necessity with stuff that you needed for the band. And sometimes that's what design, I guess, normally is. It's like to fulfill a need, right? And then you create that need, you obviously solve that issue and then move on. What was that journey as a musician like? And has that affected your art to this day? And does it still affect your art to this day? And vice versa, like did your art affect your influence your music in a particular way as well?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, because when I joined a band, started with a few other folks, and I was working in a music shop as well at the same time, so I was consumed by music. I was still interested in art and design, but I'd fallen out of the habit of drawing, and then music was my life, and I was just all in on music. I don't think I did that much design work or drawing when I was playing guitar, when I was in the band. Although they still seem one and the same to me, because they're kind of creative pursuits.
Yeah.
Even though they're kind of obviously different mediums. But I've never really thought about it like that. I don't think they have informed my art at all, like music. Although, since I have gotten into design and particularly 3D, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I do want to combine music with 3D and some sort of like animated film or something like that, where the music would be intrinsic to the design that you're seeing, rather than just, like random soundtrack.
Now, I think that's like, because they go hand in hand a lot, right? I mean, like the Star Wars, for example, is the perfect blend of visual and audio, not just even sound effects, but even music as well. and I can relate because there's something similar that I want to do. I'm not a musician, but I can use a computer to make beats and whatnot, and tying that in with the stuff that I create just seems like it's something that I have to at least attempt. Whether it's going to be successful or not, we'll wait and see. But it's something that I just feel like I need, you know, to like go in that space. So it's cool to hear that that's the same case for you as well. And yeah, like there's something. Well, it's clear that how powerful the visual and audio side things can be. And it's cool to see that you're experimenting in that field.
Actually, you know, funny that you mentioned Star Wars, because obviously, just looking at, I did the guitar, didn't I?
Yeah.
That was obviously influenced, and it kind of brings back memories of when I was in the band. I did actually have an old shitty guitar that I hacked up one day, and I wanted to like spray paint it and just make it a little bit more unique. But this was basically what I had in mind back then, was to just like I've always wanted a copper guitar. And it was the kind of thing that I would love to have seen, you know, if you're watching Star Wars and somebody was playing a guitar, like what would it look like? That's basically where I was coming from.
That particular project, that is, well, all the stuff that you create, I like. And obviously the one that really got my attention initially was, again, I just joined Learn Squared, and I was tasked with like just promoting the work that's been put up on the site and everything, and obviously there's all that kind of stuff in general, and saw what you uploaded, and that was like, okay, wow, this is a great example. I believe it was hard surface modeling course, I believe it was for.
Right, yeah.
And yeah, that jumped out because it was very different from anything else that anybody had done whilst following that course.
Right, okay.
Obviously, you use that course to create basically a weapon, a gun, and a lot of people did that. And but it's done in obviously a cool and different way. So you know, it's almost like, I don't mean this in any disrespect, but it's like a beautiful meme of a project, because you know it's like blending many things in one go, but then on the other side, take away all of like say the references to Nintendo and gaming and all that kind of stuff. The way you rendered it, the way you've modeled it, like it looks like an actual product. Like you have to be told that okay, this is a render of something, and maybe it's grounded because obviously you got like, you know, original, real existing products that people recognize alongside your design. So that really helps with that as well. But and then obviously, since then, the other stuff that you've done, and obviously your latest project, which is the Honda bike, right?
Yeah.
So like, you know, you got like things from weaponry, music, transportation. Like when you tackle a project, how do you approach that? Like, do you plan this, or is it something that, okay, I'm going to make this today, or do you just jump into it and then see what happens? Like, what's your creative approach in that sense?
Well, I'm always thinking of ideas, you know, like concepts, and it was always an ambition to do some sort of sci-fi vehicle. I can't even remember why. Oh yeah, actually, you know, the original motor compo, there's something ridiculous about it, isn't there? You know, particularly when you see someone sitting on it, because it's so small.
Yeah.
But there's also something a little bit futuristic about the original motor compo as well, which always appealed to me. And I thought, oh, it'd be great to just update that, but not make it small, make it, you know, like a real sized sci-fi bike.
Yeah.
I just thought it was ripe for that. And I've always loved that design. So that really appealed to me. But, you know, in general, I have, you know, I'm sure you have the same as well. Like I've got notes on my phone, and I'm just, whenever an idea pops into my head, I just write it down, type it down. And I've always got like a list of stuff that I want to get through. And there's some ideas that I came up with years ago that I haven't even gotten around to doing yet. But I do like, I mean, maybe I've stumbled upon some sort of formula, but, you know, they're all kind of interesting concepts that have seemed to have struck a chord with people, particularly the Famigam and the motor compo, because, you know, you're playing around with existing IP, using brands that people already love, you know, you're kind of tapping into nostalgia, but giving them something new. I don't know.
And, you know, like, there's a few things I want to definitely call back on, and the things you mentioned. I was thinking, especially like, you know, taking notes down and jotting ideas down. But just what you just mentioned there specifically, is like how audiences react to your work. And obviously you mentioned that two particular pieces resonate very well with an audience.
Yeah.
But even for yourself, like I imagine that when you started making them, the audience was, I guess, probably at the back of your mind, right? Like these were something you
Oh
did for
yeah. I
yourself.
mean, I didn't even cross my mind, to be honest with you.
And so what was it about, like, for yourself then? Like, is that probably the same for you? Like, say if someone else had made this, do you reckon you probably react the same way that people have been reacting to your work?
Oh yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Although that sounds really big-headed. But
No. I know what you mean though. Like, it's a case of like, I guess it hits your taste buds, right?
yeah. It's just like tapping into, and I'm a sucker for nostalgia and things like old Honda logos or Nintendo from the early 90s.
Yeah.
I love all that stuff.
And you're right. There is something like, even like logos in general. I remember like talking to my brother recently about it. Like we were just geeking out over not just even logos, but what they call, when you see VHSs and the little studios, little
the branding.
Before that, like with I think it was RoboCop, the Orion thing that used to come up before that.
And the idents,
that's it, idents. The music, the little jingles I had with them, all that kind of stuff. Like that for me just sets up the film perfectly. When I hear that, I expect that particular film to come on, and whether it is or isn't, like it definitely like programs you. Obviously, that's nostalgia perfectly, and like Honda, for example. I like F1, and like the Honda on the back of the rings of the Red Bulls just looks super cool. Like of all the other liveries you can get, and I know a lot of it's just all commercial, it's all just advertising. But there's just something cool about certain logos, certain like branding and the way they have stylized their text and everything. And I guess that you could say adds authenticity to a particular design, right? Like like obviously you mentioned this is based off something existing, based on your interpretation. It's just like you could say the Akira, like the bike in Akira, is a similar thing. Like having real world branding on something that's so out there, so cool, so original. It just grounds it in a way where maybe if it didn't have that, that wouldn't exist.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because if going back to my guitar project, I didn't, because I didn't really think about it at the time. It was just like, sci-fi based hard surface guitar, which I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily make it like a derivative of a brand like Fender or Gibson, even though the body shape was loosely based on a Fender Jazzmaster. But the Super Famicom was Nintendo, the bike was Honda, and if I had made the guitar like a Fender futuristic guitar, then maybe, I don't know, it might have resonated a little bit more, because you're playing around with that, like I said, existing IP, and like you saying, it makes it more grounded when you see that logo that is so recognizable, but it's in something that hasn't been done before. I think that's what really resonates with people. Yeah.
And I think it's also a case of the way you've executed it. It looks like an official product. Like if someone's scrolling along social media, like I'm sure you're aware how quickly people consume and just, scroll through quite quickly. And the fact that they probably saw that and it looks like, hey, is this a real thing? And whether they realize it or not and they still enjoy it, obviously that's super cool. But you're just like, I guess it's like sometimes again with design, we mentioned that it's solution. Sometimes it's not even that. It's a case of asking a question. Like, is this something that you'd accept as a product that you would either want to use or interact with or, want to own? But at the same time, for me, like say those particular 3 projects, they seem that they can exist in the same universe. Obviously, clearly they do, because it's from your mind, from your creative mindset and your process. Like, is this something of all the concepts that you're gathering and making notes of? Like, is this just something like that's probably your style, your aesthetic, or are you thinking of like, like do these kind of exist in a similar, like Tarantino films that kind of exist in the same universe, whether they are linked or not? Is that something that you're kind of maybe thinking about, or maybe not? It just happened kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think I am consciously thinking about that, but like you say, I do think they could belong into this, the same universe. I think, they're all kind of retro-futuristic things. Yeah. And I'm definitely obsessed with retro-futurism and, nostalgia in general, even though with the inception of all of those projects, I didn't intentionally set out to make them retro-futuristic. They just happened that way because I was just like following the idea of the concept. Like, oh, that's a good idea. Let me just execute that right to its conclusion. And like some of the other ideas that I've had that I haven't got around to doing, which I hopefully will do next year, maybe they are as well. Yeah. You know, retro-futuristic or have a little bit of that flavor. You know, maybe that's my style. I don't know. I've never really thought about it too much, but yeah.
But I assume that when you make them, like, obviously the creating art is not always enjoyable. It's not always pleasurable. Most likely it's because of running into issues, troubleshooting, or maybe just not realizing the vision, or it's not you know, coming out the way you want to. But my impression is, again, looking at these, like, this seems like this is purely enjoyable when you're making these. Am I hitting on the head of that, or am I wrong?
Not necessarily. I think with all of them, there was like definitely moments when I struggled. I think the part that I like most is when all of the modeling is done and then, you know, you bring it to life by, you know, adding materials and lights. But I think I always get overwhelmed at the beginning of, you know, just the sheer amount of possibilities of what something could look like. You know, if it's a gun or a bike, you know, what's it going to look like? Where do you even start? Of course, you know, you do research, yada, yada. But then even down to just like resolving secondary shapes within a primary shape, there's still billions of, you know, permutations or possibilities. And I find myself usually just designing as I'm modeling. You know, I don't do elaborate drawings. I do a lot of thumbnail sketches, and I have the idea of the basic shapes drawn out. And then I model it, and then, just I continue from there. But that is a lot of hard work, I think, on my side. Like that's the biggest challenge for me is usually that part, that process of the design. And then the modeling is pretty straightforward. You know, once you know what it looks like, it's pretty simple.
And you mentioned there, like, trying to figure out, obviously, just like you said, you kind of like design whilst you're modeling. All your stuff is based on, or looks like it exists in the real world. Do you do a lot of research in like existing products and how they're assembled, or do you have like a general sense of like how things are put together, like in an engineering sense, and this makes sense there, this doesn't make sense there, or is that just purely based on the research that you?
Yeah, it's purely based on the research, because even though I did want to get into product and industrial design, you know, that's not my training. I'm just a traditional graphic designer, which I do think helps. Having a traditional graphic design background can still help in 3D, but because I don't have a specific industrial design background, I don't really have, you know, an idea about manufacturing or certain things like that. So it is purely based on a lot of research, So I usually just start like a Pinterest page, and because, you know, the way I use Pinterest, I don't really share all of that stuff. So I just keep them as secret boards, and I just pin loads of stuff. And I have like about 30 or 40 boards, and they usually end up with about 200 or 300 pins. And then I end up with like folders on my desktop, and then folders within folders of like latest, you know, research. And there's usually a lot of research. For like real world things, like real world objects and industrial design and that kind of thing, to precisely make it feel more realistic.
So one thing I personally have an issue with when it comes to research, like I can easily get lost in that and just
me too,
keep going there. So how do you combat that? Like, is that something that you've had to work on, or do you kind of know when to stop, or do you kind of realize, like myself, sometimes it's too late and, you know, you have to kind of end it and then just get going with the project?
Yeah. I think it's an ongoing struggle, isn't it? I think it's probably the same for a lot of people as well. It's definitely something I struggle with in the early parts, because, you know, you can get lost in research and just, it's like sometimes you just have to just make a decision and just like stop, have confidence. I keep telling that to myself all the time.
Yeah.
And I give myself telling off all the time, but, you know, it's easy to slip into those old habits. It's like, oh, maybe I'll start another Pinterest board for, I don't know, hinges. No.
Yeah, yes. That's exactly what happens. And with your projects in particular, obviously they're personal projects, so I guess there's no need for a specific deadline. But there are many people out there on personal projects who do set themselves a deadline anyway, just to make sure they get it over the line. Purely, obviously, for the reason that, like we just kind of mentioned, you can continually chip away at something, and there's even a point where you can degrade your project by constantly doing that. So has that been the case for you, or is this like do you stop and start with these? Is this like, is this something like a Sunday project where you jump in the garage and start working on a car? Is this kind of the same thing for yourself, or does this consume you in any waking second you have you're working on your personal stuff?
I think for the majority of the last few that I've done, they've all taken like about 4 or 5 weeks in total, something like that. But I don't do them in one big chunk or one big block. I sort of chip away at them here and there. And, you go through peaks and troughs, or, something pops up and you just don't have the chance to sit at the computer. Family stuff. Or you're just too tired. If I start these projects, it's very rare that I can just do like 6 or 7 hours a day after work. Sometimes, it's impossible, because if you sat at the computer all day, 8 or 9 hours, the last thing you want to do is just sit there for another 5 or 6 hours. You know what I mean? It's just, sometimes you just, I need to take a step back. But, I just chip away at them. But there is a point in the project when, probably halfway through, then yes, it does start to consume me. And then it's like, now I'm just like fully in, and I can't like step away from it until it's done. Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned there as well, like about, like it's quite important because it's easy to kind of fall into that trap where, like you mentioned, you sit at a desk, work for X amount of hours, and then when you work on personal stuff, again, work the same amount of hours. I'm sure we've all done it. We actually have done that as well. Have you ever been burnt by that? Like, have you ever hit a brick wall with that and kind of made yourself realize that, okay, this cannot continue? Because I'm sure, like in the early days, maybe even like when you're with your band as well and doing that kind of stuff, like probably similar things are happening where it was, if this was like, say, a quote unquote regular job, employers would be investigated for making people work so many hours. But when it comes to creative stuff, it seems like, it's a free for all, work as many hours as you possibly can. Like, is that something that you've experienced?
Not really, no. Maybe in the early days, like when I was learning 3D, I maybe burnt myself out. I think, when I was using Octane for the first time, actually, I was doing a sort of a render every other day. But I wasn't really, other than like learning Octane, which was a great exercise to do. I just ended up stopping after about 6 months because I didn't want to do these renders, like a render a day, like people were doing all over the world. Which is, fair enough for some people if you got the time. But for me, it wasn't even a question of time. It was just like, what's the point of just doing it for the sake of it? Do you know what I mean?
Right. So you kind of like got the knowledge you wanted, and it was a case of, what's the point now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I got the knowledge I wanted. And then it was like, okay, why don't I just take a step back and just come back with more thought out projects or more thought out concepts rather than just rendering for the sake of rendering,
So early on, you were working, I guess, traditionally, like you mentioned, with traditional mediums, and switched to digital with 3D. Like, I know that was C4D. What are you using at the moment? Is it still the same kind of like? What's your pipeline right now?
Yeah, it's still Cinema 4D and Fusion 360.
Yeah.
And I'm rendering with Redshift at the moment, and I've been using Substance Painter a bit as well. I used it for the motor compo. And that's brilliant. Whenever I can use Substance Painter, is really great. And that's it. Yeah. Other than, the usual Adobe suite of, After Effects or Photoshop or whatever. But mainly Cinema 4D and Fusion 360 and Redshift. Yeah.
And those particular tools, have you tried different ones and settled on those, or is it because that's what you've kind of settled on because that's what you jumped into initially, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think initially I started using Cinema 4D about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And then for modeling specifically, started using Fusion in around about 2015, end of 2015. Because I never really got the hang of subdivision modeling within Cinema 4D. I mean, it was just so unbelievably complex, even though I have improved that knowledge over the years. But when I discovered Fusion, it was, wow, you can model something really quick, you know. And it was more of a revelation. It was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to use this from now on. And for certain models, obviously, you know, you can just do it so much quicker.
Yeah.
As opposed to subdivision surface modeling. You know, if you do all that in polygons, something with loads of holes, it's just going to take forever.
And especially like with the hard surface stuff and the intricate details you use, and even like, I guess, things that are seem at least meant for the real world, like Fusion 360 or softwares like that, they just seem perfect for that, because that's what they're built for, right? Like they're intended to be used to manufacture something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they're deeper as well. If you want to dive deeper, you know, that's all there. If you want to get into that crazy CAD stuff and the engineering side, or simulations and joints and all of that stuff, yeah, it's all there for you to dive deeper. And I have been getting a bit more into it recently.
And like, are there any other tools that are either on the horizon, on your kind of wish list, that you want to learn? Because obviously there's like a bombardment of a lot of tools now that can do things quicker. And like you mentioned, Substance Painter is a perfect one, because it, for me at least as well, and I'm sure you'd agree, it just makes, you know, just like working in 3D, like, you know, designing, painting, liveries, all that kind of stuff, it just makes things so much easier, more intuitive, at least from an artistic point of view.
Definitely.
You know, like real-time renderers now are almost going to be, well, they're kind of the norm now, you could say. But like, is anything like that appealing to you? And if it is that a distraction to your workflow at the moment?
There's a couple of things, you know, I keep seeing, you know, repeated all the time, as a Blender, Unreal Engine, but Unreal Engine, that does look intriguing, you know. And I've been saying this for the last 2 years, you know, I'll get around to learning it one day. It'll probably never happen, but, you know, you can always try. I did download it once, actually, and it sat on my hard drive. I must have opened it about once, looked at a 10-minute tutorial, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? But I'm hoping one day I'll get around to learning that, at least just some basics, just so that I can get my head around it. Because I do think, you know, like you said, it's the future, it's even the present. It's a good one to learn. Another one I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this online, Substance 3D Modeler.
It looks like their version of like ZBrush and 3D Coat and stuff. Yeah,
I mean, that looks really interesting. And
at least
looks like and you don't need to unwrap. You can just go straight into Substance Painter after you've modeled and just start painting. That's what I've seen. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's correct, but I mean, if that's the case, that'd be amazing.
I mean, I guess from an Adobe point of view, if they can make it work and they can prove that it does what it says in the tin, then that's a no-brainer for a lot of people, because a lot of us, I'm sure, subscribe to the Adobe suite, and you know, if it's kind of, I'm sure they're going to make you pay for it, but if it's kind of in there in that ecosystem, like one thing I like with Adobe is like with Premiere Pro and After Effects and even Photoshop, like it's easy to get projects from each of those into the other packages, and in the 3D pipeline, like you mentioned right now, C4D, Substance, and Fusion 360, they're all different manufacturers, or different developers, and obviously if it's all in one place, in theory that should make it a little bit easier, right?
It should be, yeah. I wish they'd make it a little bit cheaper as well, though, or just incorporate all of that Substance stuff into just the Creative Suite price. That would be the no-brainer for me. Yeah,
for sure. I think like they got that current promo 50%, which is a shame, because it seems like it's never ever going to be below that ever again when it goes up in full price.
It's a shame, isn't it? Maybe I'll switch to Blender one day. I don't know.
I've been using that almost exclusively for the most part for the last 18 months or so. And that wasn't intentional. It was a case of like, I got the hang of it, I did a few projects in there, and then I got used to it. And in that time, they've improved it a fair bit.
Blender?
Yeah.
Wow.
I've used Fusion 360. I use it a fair bit as well, like for specific things. It's, for me, my go-to tool. Obviously, I know Moi 3D. It's almost like the same thing. And I believe it's cheaper. So there's any of those two is kind of like, I haven't used it yet, but that could easily be in that place. But I know Blender has a bunch of plugins. It's like Blender's is a different universe altogether. It's got its own little ecosystem. Developer, like the way things get developed for it is completely in a different league compared to, I guess, your more established software developers like, Autodesk and Adobe and stuff. Like things move pretty quick from my opinion, or from my perspective at least. And assembling things in there, almost like even rendering things in its own native render engine is, at least maybe to the workflow I use, has been almost the similar results. And even now getting to the less, like the same kind of ease of use that I've experienced when I was using, say, Maya and V-Ray, which was my pipeline before that. And I do still use Substance mixed with that as well. And they've got some cool plugins. I think that plugins available for all of them anyway, where you can just send your mesh over to Substance and do your thing and then send it back. But, it's like, if in the end, all C4D is just to assemble your shaders and hit the render button, then Blender can definitely do that. And I think with the new 3.0 update, with cycles and stuff, it's definitely something to consider, considering it's £0.
Yeah, I know. That's another one as well. Like Unreal, it's like, I actually downloaded that as well. Yeah, I think last year, and I tried to learn something, but the only problem for me is that freelancing, for motion graphics, which I used to do of. Yeah. Nobody's using Blender, so I still have to be using Cinema 4D, but I can still download it. No harm, it's free.
Yeah, I guess it's like one of those ones. One of the reasons where what I did put it off for a while was because of just like the R&D you got to put into it and the time you got to do to kind of get like, I can see examples that you can do X, Y, and Z in it, but I still got to get used to it in my way, like, where things are, where the menu button is. When you use the software for so long, like say you have in C4D, you kind of know when you hit a problem, how to quickly troubleshoot it. And then in something like Blender, yes, the tools that you can use to execute a task are maybe obvious, but how to overcome a problem is not so much, because you need to kind of know the thing, not inside out, but you kind of need to know it like intimately well, right? So that's the kind of issue I found. But like now, after a while, that helps. So it's whenever you get around to it, it's I wouldn't be surprised if next time we speak, you'd be like, I switched to Blender and it's this, that, and that. And I'm not one of the guys who is like hardcore Blender. Like I'm just like, if something else comes out tomorrow and it's cool, I'd happily switch to that. I'm not like wedded to it, but the hype of Blender is there's definitely something to it.
Yeah, it does look impressive. Does definitely look impressive. So I'll look into that next year as well. And if the majority of my freelance work does just turn out to be, like modeling and rendering, then probably might not even need Cinema 4D eventually.
Yeah, because I think like with C4D, like you mentioned with motion graphics is, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not too like, I guess, clued up in that particular field and realm. But I guess it's C4D's ability to produce like, I guess, abstract geometries and animations, and like, you can really push the boundaries with that, right?
Definitely, yeah. They have this like MoGraph module, or I don't even know how to describe it, but tool set. I think that's the best way of putting it. Within Cinema 4D, and they have like cloners and things like that, which were, when they designed them, really unique to Cinema 4D, which sort of lent itself very well to animation, broadcast graphics, and stuff like that. But I think eventually, as a freelancer, I would like to move away from that kind of stuff and just just do like modeling and rendering, I think. So,
A few things I want to jump on. Obviously, freelance is definitely one of them. And even back to how you mentioned about like getting down notes and concepts. But prior to that, I want to talk a bit about your poster journey, because making movie posters, like, again, you know, some of them are just, I remember like growing up, the only way you knew about films is when you went to the cinemas and saw the posters of what's coming soon, and get excited by those. And some of them, obviously, the ones that caught your eye definitely caught your eye. And some movie posters are just iconic. They're amazing. They're beautiful. And I remember last time we spoke, you had a cool story about one of the movie posters you made. But yeah, I'd just love to at least get the audience a chance to listen to this. But even generally hearing more so about what that was like working in that particular, I guess, discipline.
Yeah, it was, I did that from 2013 up until, let's see, about 2019, early 2019. That's when I left. So I worked for two different studios in London, Empire Design and All City Media. And we were doing, just creative advertising for the film industry, which is basically film posters. But that's how they like to describe it. I always used to think it was designing film posters, but they were like, no, it's creative advertising. Because I had this kind of naive approach when I first joined it. It was like, oh, I'm just making, pretty pictures.
Yeah.
Or posters that look cool.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the time when I first worked at the first studio, they would just let you do whatever you wanted, really. I could just literally design any kind of poster I had in my head. And you weren't even really encouraged too much to think about the concept behind the film. It was just like, if it looks cool, that's good. And yeah, I was like a machine eventually, just like pumping out posters. I wish I could, I can't even remember some of the ones that I've done. I'm just trying to see. Oh yeah, I've got some on my Behance page, yeah. Let's have a look. Yeah, there was the one Spotlight. I did the film poster for Spotlight, and that film ended up winning some awards, I think. Yeah, it's won some Oscars, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one with Mark Ruffalo, I think, in there.
Yeah. So I did that.
So like with that kind of stuff, was that like for, like the poster for a specific region, or was that the poster for the film worldwide? How did it work with that?
Initially, I think it was just for Europe, but I think they used that concept in America as well.
Sick.
Yeah, so that was like the last thing that I'd done for Empire Studio before I left All City Media. And I had left when we had just sent round 1. And you know what these things are like. There's like round 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
And then so I was just starting my next job. And a few months later, I saw this poster on the Underground. I was like, oh, I did that.
Hey.
It was really funny, like seeing it like that. It's like, yeah, they kept everything basically that I designed in round 1. Except for they just added a strip of heads in sort of boxes because, of course, that's contractual. You can't get away from that sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I remember you saying that.
Yeah. But yeah, that was pretty cool. It was quite a surprise. Because that's how we worked back then. There was like about 20 designers and you'd have a film and everyone would just add their posters, ideas to one folder. And sometimes you'll end up with about 50 or 60 designs. It was crazy. And then you just compile the PDF and show that to the client.
Yep.
And just like a ton and ton of designs. But to actually get something through, it's pretty cool.
And what was your, I guess, favorite poster? Like, did you have a favorite poster, or was it like you mentioned? Like, in fact, before I ask that question, you mentioned a little bit about you kind of just left to doing it. Like, was it quite like an autonomous line of work? Like, we just kind of left, like, here's like, what were the briefs like? In fact, like, would you say, here's the brief and make this, or was it okay, so make a poster, here's the name of the film, you carry on?
We would usually have a meeting and, we talk about the concept behind the film, and we could even read the scripts as well early. Cool. I remember they had the scripts of Better Call Saul when that came through. But I refused to read it because I didn't want any spoilers.
Wise. Well, I guess wise for like spoilers, but I don't know. It would have been cool just to see that piece of art.
Yeah, but I didn't work on that particular one in the end. But yeah, sometimes we could go to the cinema. They'd have private screenings for films that would be released, before they were released, I should say, like 6 months prior or even longer. So that was quite cool. But yeah, generally there were, detailed briefs and meetings about the designs. But in the first studio, it was more because I guess they were busy and busier than the second studio and slightly more mainstream. So it was more about just like churning them out.
Mm. And if I recall, you did have an experience with working directly or with the director of one of the film's posters. Am I getting that right?
Oh, I don't remember.
Is my memory failing me?
It was the Neon Demon. Was that one? Was it that one?
That with reference, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because on the second studio that I joined, All City Media, we actually had a good relationship with him. So we were, I never met him, but as a studio, we were working directly with him.
Cool.
On a lot of things, actually. We even did the opening credit sequence to that film.
Oh, wicked.
And it was really, really rare to deal directly with the director. That was almost, unheard of, because you're just usually dealing with marketers and, marketing divisions of distributors. And very rarely would you even hear from a director, whether they like the poster or not. It's just usually they weren't in the loop at all. So, yeah, I mean, that was good working with him.
Did you find that like being directly with the person who's basically going to say, the person whose vision it is, did that change your approach at all or not so much?
Yeah, you could be a little bit more, I suppose you could be a little bit more carefree in how you approached it. You didn't have to be so, safe or kind of conservative with your approach, which is good, obviously. Yeah, and that Neon Demon, that was my idea, the one that came out.
Cool.
The one that they used for the theatrical poster, yeah. Well, I say my idea. I mean, I did actually take a part of the poster that had already been done for the teaser poster, but then I kind of mashed it up and, re-envisioned the concept. But it was all my idea.
And even like to this day, is there anything from working in creative advertising that influences, or not even influences, but like the skills and tools that you've taken from that time that you're using still to this day? Or is that kind of like a chapter that you've closed, left behind, and now you're doing things differently?
Yeah, I think I probably have left it behind in that sense. One thing I do miss about it, though, is working with typography. I always used to love that, I do miss that about 3D, because sometimes I don't even get to work with it at all. But yeah, if I do get the chance to work with typography in my own projects, then I guess that informs it, yeah.
Is there a particular thing about typography that you like? Like, is there a certain, what does it trigger in your, creative process that really makes you enjoy it?
I think it's just the combination of imagery and typography, and having that juxtaposition and the extra element of contrast that you can have, which can kind of elevate something visual, I think, if used correctly, of course. Yeah, definitely.
And talking, back to the topic of ideas and concepts, as you mentioned that you make notes and stuff. That's something that I do a fair bit as well. I guess probably for similar reasons as yourself, is a case of either there's no time or an idea comes to you and you just want to get that down, and you do want to get around to doing that. And I'm sure you'd agree as well that sometimes you do jot the ideas down and maybe look back at them thinking, yeah, that one's not so cool anymore. But there's some that really okay, I need to get this done. I want to get this done. And you look forward to doing that. So, and as you mentioned that you got a bunch of ideas, a bunch of stuff coming out very, very soon, and you're working on and hoping to get out soon as well. But how many ideas would you say that you have jotted down or on your notes app, and that kind of stuff that you really excited about and you want to get done?
I'd say there's about 10 ideas,
Mm-hmm.
10 separate ideas. I'm just having a quick flick through it now, actually. Some of them, they're kind of just like riffs. I'm just riffing off the top of my head, but I still write it down anyway, just in case I come back to it and think, oh yeah, that is a good idea. But yeah, I have about 10 ideas for separate personal projects. And then, the rest of it are just, they're not really projects. They're just maybe it's just a one render, Yeah, for instance, like last night, for some reason, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to design like a sci-fi dystopian milk float? I've never seen that before.
Me neither. No, and you got to do it now. You put it out.
Yeah. But yeah, some of the ideas that I've got are very different to what I've already put out there, which is probably I should get around to doing it someday.
And did these ideas come to you like anywhere, like random places, maybe, just something that is completely unrelated to, making art? Or do you find that you have a zone at certain times, like where you get in a creative like headspace where the ideas just flood in and you start like jotting them down?
No, I think they come to me like throughout the day or even at night when I'm trying to sleep and my brain won't let me sleep, and I just get weird ideas, Yeah, they just come to me at any time, really, because I'm always daydreaming or not sleeping. So there's always room for, my brain is always just going around in circles. So I never not have ideas. Whether they're any good or not is another matter. Of course, when you come out with an idea when you're just not really thinking straight, or like you're trying to get to sleep, and you think, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Like,
there's always that thing of a case of like, there's multiple stages. One is having the idea, and then the other one is putting it in practice and then kind of realizing maybe it's not such a great idea, or maybe it's a better idea than you had thought. But you kind of like have to go through that process of attempting to execute it to see if it actually is a great idea. And do you go for the same process with professional stuff? And have you ever adopted like some of your existing ideas you want to do for yourself and maybe transplanted them into professional stuff? Or do you have a different approach when you're ideating for, I guess, a professional brief or for a client?
Not really, no. I haven't done much with that lately. The previous job that I was in for about a year and a half, I wasn't really required to even come up with ideas, to be honest with you. I was a 3D artist, but it was more like, here's the concept, it's already done, you just have to light it and render it. So there wasn't really a lot of thought about that, which is one of the reasons why I left. And the majority of motion graphics projects that I've had are pretty similar as well. Like before that, when I was freelancing in 2019, it's like you're just required as meat in the room to kind of execute something that's already been done. Having said that, the project that I'm working on now as a professional freelance project is the first one that I've done where I've actually had to be creative. And I've actually, like all of those things that I was just talking about, random ideas and idea generation, I've had to employ all of those kind of tactics for this current project that I can't talk about.
Cool. So freelance. Last time we spoke, that was, I believe you had just begun that journey. So yeah, I guess before we dive deep into that topic, how has those last couple of years been? Like, as a summary, like, have you at points regretted it? Has it been wholly like, okay, so what's that journey been like for you?
Yeah, it's been all right. Yeah. I mean, 2019 was a bit quiet. Then luckily, I got a full-time job at the beginning of 2020, which coincided with the pandemic, which was good timing. And then left that to go back to freelancing. And I don't regret that at all. No, because even when I went back to a full-time permanent job, it was always like, I knew I was always going to come back to freelancing. I think the permanent job was just more of a convenience thing. It's like, okay, it's good to have like a regular wage coming in. But other than that, yeah, I don't really want to go back to like a full-time permanent position. And there's been opportunities, like lots of good jobs have come up. Not that I've been offered them, but I could have applied to them. But I just thought, nah, I don't want to get back into that. Even if it was a blinding studio and it was, you know, a great place that did great stuff, I still think just the overall drudgery is this is for me personally speaking, you know, it will get to me eventually, you know, just 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, every week, every month, every year. Yeah, I think what appeals to me about freelance is, you know, the chance or the opportunity to just do something different, you know, or to have that time in between just to do your own stuff. And I don't think you get that chance with a full-time permanent job.
When you began freelancing, like, how did you transition? Was it quite abrupt, or did you take steps to ensure that was a smooth transition? And did you kind of jump in at the deep end?
Yeah.
Or did you know what you're doing?
I
All the freelance stuff.
I did all of the stuff that you shouldn't do first time. Yeah. So basically I didn't save up any money. I handed in my notice and I basically had 4 weeks notice, and then I'd done that. But I was lucky that I found a decent freelance job straight away, which was like about 4 or 5 weeks freelancing, which was good because, you know, obviously I needed the money, but I could have very easily and not found one. And it was like, oh, you just quit your job. What are you doing, you idiot? But yeah, I was lucky in that regard. What else? Yeah, and it was just motion graphics kind of stuff. Yeah, and then just stayed doing that for a few more months, about another 10 or 11 months after that. Yeah.
And what kind of things, if you were to do it again, would you do differently?
Well, this is what since coming back to freelancing, I actually saved up some money.
Okay.
Because, you know, I was working during lockdown and like most people stuck at home or what have you, and just, you know, naturally you're saving money. So I was like, wow, I've got enough money to just have a bit of a cushion in the bank so that when I go back to freelancing, if there is like a quiet few months, then it's not going to affect me. So I have that cushion. And I was told that more or less when I first did it in 2019. Oh, you should have 6 months savings. But I was just too eager to do it. I didn't listen, but yeah. Anyone that wants to go freelancing, you know, that's probably the best thing to do, is just to make sure that you have about 6 months savings, if possible.
And like, what kind of things did you have to prepare? Like, do you have to get yourself equipment, like a PC or anything? Or, you know, like, did you have to structure yourself in a different way?
Not really, no, because I had my PC at home and I needed a laptop really, because I was just freelancing at random places over London, throughout London. But luckily, like the places that I went to, they all had their own setups. You know, they all had desktops. So it was like, yeah, just sit here and just do your thing. But yeah, that's something that I would need eventually. And if, you know, the pandemic ever eases off, which it doesn't look like it's going to anytime soon, then I would need something like that, you know. Or maybe because of the pandemic, you know, the legacy of the pandemic means that maybe studios aren't fussed anymore. Like when you go freelance and they won't mind you doing remote work. So at the moment, like I'm freelancing for a client that's not based in the UK. So yeah, I'm doing it remotely. So.
And so prior to that, all the freelance stuff where you were kind of in-house at the particular studios, right?
Yeah.
And how was that? Like, which one do you prefer? So obviously your personal projects happen at home. Your freelance project is remote versus stuff in-house. Like, do you have a preference, or are you completely flexible and you kind of don't mind?
Yeah, I'm kind of flexible. I don't mind, to be honest with you. They all have their drawbacks. It is quite intimidating, you know, just as a freelancer, walking into a studio randomly on a Monday morning as a complete stranger. And like, excuse me, I'm supposed to be doing some freelance today. It's kind of embarrassing sometimes, you know, it feels like the first day at school.
Yeah.
And it's like that a lot, you know, when you're a freelancer, particularly if you're in a new studio every week. So yeah, I do prefer remote working. But, working with other people is good as well, because it's just a lot easier to communicate with somebody that's telling you to do something rather than emailing or something like that. It's a lot better to be in the studio. But yeah.
And what kind of skills have you seen that you've developed, or maybe developed on a different level than you were developing before when you were working, like, say, in a regular setup? Like, have you noticed anything that you've kind of adopted, or behaviors that have changed since you've switched to freelance?
Not really, no. I mean, I haven't been doing it enough to have noticed anything, to be honest with you. Not the second time round, anyway. Yeah, not really.
And with the kind of, like you mentioned, that there were, like, I guess, gaps or breaks in between projects. How did you deal with those? Was that something that you kind of knew that, okay, that's going to come and I'm okay with that? Like, did you enjoy that time away from doing professional stuff, or did you have a plan of what you were going to do when that happened? And I guess, like, did you just crunch on personal stuff when that kind of did happen?
Oh, I mean, gaps between freelance gigs. Yeah. Well, in 2019, it was a little bit of a dead year, and a lot of my freelance agents were saying that as well. Like, oh, you should have been freelancing in 2018 because it was like a non-stop gravy train. But 2019 is pretty dead. But yeah, that was weird because I only really did a couple of one personal project during that time, even though I had quite a lot of time off, but I found it quite hard to relax, you know what I mean? When you're just trying to look for the next freelance gig. But now it's going to be different because I've got savings and I've got a whole plan. It's like, okay, once this current freelance gig has ended, I'm going to do this personal project. And then, once that one's finished, I know there'll be another job that will start. So I'll be constantly busy, which is good. Cool. Good to have a plan as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to be cracking on with that, really.
And like, with the stuff that you mentioned before, like, you're a freelance agent. So how does that work? You've signed up to an agency, and like, for people who may be looking to branch out to freelance and they're not sure, like, do they go completely alone and look for work? Like, what was your approach to that, and how does it work with working with an agency?
So it's just like they're more or less like temp agencies. So you'd sign up with them, and then they give you a call if anything comes up. It's not like a so-called real agent, like an actor would have,
right,
where they're kind of looking after your every need, or taking like a commission or something like that. Yeah, it's a little bit of a different thing. So I think most people, if you don't have like a load of contacts yourself, then you would probably need to sign up with an agent. Yeah, and there's quite a few in London. There's quite a few. Yeah, so I signed up with about 3 or 4 agents or agencies. And some of them have a different focus. Some of them are more animation or broadcast. Some of them are a little bit more advertising or rendering and lighting. Some of them are a bit more modeling based.
And you mentioned that you obviously, like, since your freelance journey, the kind of work that you did at the beginning to what you're doing now obviously has adjusted and changed. Like, how much of that was stuff that you've intentionally, like, decisions you've made to change that, or did it kind of happen by chance? I mean, it was an intention to kind of change my direction, even as a freelancer, and not just do like random motion graphics. But okay, I want to go more in this direction this year or this time. But it was more kind of luck, I suppose, because I was approached by a client after I posted my Honda Motor Compo. And basically the client saw it online, they liked it, and then they hired me. Cool.
So that's pretty lucky in that regard, but also, it obviously shows that, if you're more productive in terms of, I'm telling myself this actually, if I'm more productive doing personal projects, then, these kind of opportunities are more likely to happen. Obviously, if I don't publish anything, nothing's going to happen. So that's actually a pretty good thing.
And
to say the least, yeah.
I guess, like, so would you say that that would probably influence maybe some of the personal projects you got in the pipeline. I guess maybe there's a danger to that because you don't want to, you know, you just want to, like you mentioned, just want to go for it, create it, and then put it out there when it's done and see what happens. But do you perhaps see yourself maybe, you know, like in the back of your mind thinking that, okay, this kind of project will maybe get me this kind of work? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is the first time I've thought about that, actually. Like, have I created like a formula for myself? Because I have all of these other projects, like ideas for personal projects that are nothing like the stuff that I've done so far. But I thought, oh, maybe I should just forget about that and then, you know, go down this route of just like doing, you know, riffs off of existing IP that really kind of hit home. But, you know, maybe that's a bit cynical. I don't know.
And just before we wrap up, like any, I guess, like top tips or just even words of advice that you'd like to maybe share to that person who's listening who is either maybe just trying to embark on their creative journey, like trying to get themselves like a visual identity and make work that resonates, you know, obviously not so much with an audience, but something that's true to their own interests, I guess, and maybe even on the other side, or perhaps even both, people who are embarking on that freelance journey. So maybe are like similar to yourself, were in a particular, like, I guess, a day job, a job in a field, and then jumped or wanting to jump into that, you know, the world of a freelancer, the independent world of trying to make money, art, and everything in between.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. The only thing I would say is that anything that I've done, that I'm doing at the moment, is just a result of just following my interests, which is, you know, a real obvious thing to say, but I guess I can't say anything else other than that. It's just, rather than, you know, following trends, I don't follow trends. I think I'm just not interested. But yeah, follow your passion. Follow your interests and just like dive deep into it, and then forget about trends, forget about the pressure of, you know, what's popular, and just do that. And that's all I've done. And I guess like by doing that, I'm, you know, forging a path for myself, you know, because if I could have stayed, for instance, I could have stayed doing a render every day, you know, like an everyday render. But I would have been, you know, burnt out by now. And I don't think I would have had like a style or a path by now. Maybe I would have, but I don't think so, you know. I made a conscious decision not to follow that kind of trend and just like do something different. I think that's the most important thing.
Well said, man. Allan, thank you again. I know it's been a while since I asked you to come on, and thank you for jumping on and giving me your time. And it's great chatting with you.
Cheers, man. No worries.
A huge thanks to Allan for sharing his journey, and I'm excited to see where his career goes next, and of course, looking forward to seeing more of his amazing projects. Tap on the links to give him a follow and see what he's up to. And also, don't forget, all of our first lessons are free. So head on over to learnsquare.com and start learning today. Till next time.